All right. It makes it sound like they've been listening to us, recording us the whole time, and we just didn't know it. Okay. So we're on 13A2.
Yep.
And the context is that we've been reading, we read the verse about Mordechai, and we started going off into a number of tangents about the name Yehudi, right? That Mordechai was a Yehudi, which should mean that he comes from the tribe of Judah, but he doesn't. He comes from the tribe of Benjamin. But the word Yehudi has many kinds of meanings, and we have found out that it means, in the end, a person who rejects idolatry. Okay, and that brought us into Pharaoh's daughter. Once we got to Pharaoh's daughter, we ended up talking a little bit about Moses. And Moses is praised for being a person who did so many good things for the people of Israel. The names that are used in the book of Chronicles are not seen as, they're not taken literally as real genealogies of names of people. They end up just being applied as a kind of a pretext for us to play with them, to think of creative ways of praising Moses. So he is, the verse says, hold on a second. We have the whole verse there. Yeah, up there, right? Shad that, and Yehudiah, his wife, bore Yered Avi Gedor, Chever Avi Socho, Yekutiel Avi Tzanoach, right? So they say all of this actually is about Moses, and each of these names, Gedor, Chever, Tzanoach, they're all about how Moses brought down the manna, and he made sure that Israel shouldn't sin, and that he was also the one who brought the Jewish people into closer connection with God. All of these good things, and that he protected Israel, and he gave hope to Israel, etc. Now we're up to the first independent paragraph on 13A2, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. That's what we're up to. And I want to put it out there. Does anybody want to read for us today? Going once, going twice. So I will nominate somebody to read, whether they like it or not, and that's Bill.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So good. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi.
Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi continued his exposition of the verse. The verse states that Moses was the father of Geder, the father of Socho, and the father of Zanoach.
Okay, so in the translation, we lose the original taste. The taste of the original is it's simpler. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi simply says, Avi, Avi, Avi. He goes, look back at the verse. It keeps on saying, Avi, Avi. It does.
Avi.
We've given a midrash about each of these names, Gedor and Socho and Chever. But what about the Avi, Avi, Avi? The fact, why don't, that they keep saying father of, father of, father of. So what's that? Go ahead.
This appending of, quote, father of, unquote, to each of these names teaches that Moses was Avi beTorah, a father that is a leader in Torah. Av bechavma, a father, a leader of Chokmah, a leader in wisdom. Av binviut, and a father, a leader in prophecy.
Okay. So not just that he did all of these wonderful things, but that he was the premier example of doing these things. He was, we say the mother of all so-and-sos. So this is the father of all so-and-sos, the father of all these wonderful sterling qualities. Okay, good.
Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi concluded his exposition of the verse. And these are the sons of Bitya, the daughter of Pharaoh, whom Mered married. But was his name actually Mered? Was not Caleb his name? Why is Caleb called Mered in the context of this verse? The Holy One, blessed is he, said, let Caleb, who rebelled against the plan of the spies, come and marry Pharaoh's daughter, who rebelled against the idolatry of her father's house, as stated above.
Okay. So what's the point that Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi is saying? Each of these two people were independent spirits. They were rebellious, each in their own context. So the daughter of Pharaoh was rebellious against her own father and against her own Egyptian, cultural reality at the time that was invested in killing the Hebrew babies, and she rebelled against that. She wouldn't have anything to do with that, and on the contrary, she saves this one Hebrew baby who ends up becoming Moses. Kalev is also rebellious, and who is he rebellious against?
According to this, against the spies who gave a negative report
against his own people, right? She is rebellious against she's an Egyptian who's rebellious against the Egyptians. Kalev is an Israelite who's rebellious against the Israelites. The Israelites, remember, it's not just the other 10 spies.
Yeah, it's everybody.
He and Joshua, of course, don't go along with it, but it's not just the 10 spies that he disagrees with, but he puts himself out and risks his life, actually, to stand up in front of the entire Israelite people when all of them lose their nerve and decide to go follow the 10 spies report and say, no, we're not going to go into Israel, and God is trying to kill us. He goes, no, of course we can, and they want to kill him. So he is rebelling against his own people. So in both of these individuals, within their own national ethnic groupings, saw a higher value that they needed to stand up for, despite the peer pressure, despite their own people going in the opposite direction. So how wonderful it is that they found each other, kindred spirits, and they married each other. So that's the midrashic understanding of this series of verses. Okay.
The Gemara now returns to its exposition of the Megillah. The Megillah states regarding Mordecai, who had been exiled from Jerusalem.
Okay, this is the continuation of the verse that we started with, right? Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushana bira. There was this Jewish man in the capital Shushan, right? Who Shmo Mordechai ben Shimi ben Yoy ben Kish Ish Yemini, right? We see that we did all that part. The Benjaminite who had this pedigree, and then it says, and the tradition is that when you read this part of the verse, you turn into Eichatrop. You change from Megillah chanting, cantillation, the tune for the Megillah reading, you turn it into the tune for the Book of Lamentations. Because what is it about? Asher hagla, im hagola, asher haglisa, im Yechonyahu, Yehuda. Right, that he was exiled with King Yechonyahu, or Yehoiachim, whichever one name you want to use for him, who was exiled in the pre-exile that the Babylonians instituted. So that recollection of the Golah, of the exile, is chanted in that tune of Lamentations. Okay, so what is this about? Who had been exiled from Jerusalem? Go ahead. No, you're on mute.
I didn't do that deliberately. That was accidental. But be that as it may, who had been exiled from Jerusalem. Rava said, this verse teaches that Mordecai went into exile of his own will and was not forced as were the other exiles.
Okay. So the reading that Rava gives is it keeps on talking about the exile again and again and again. Look at 33, note 33.
Note 33. Rava derives this from the wording, who had been exiled from Jerusalem along with the exiles that were exiled, when the verse could have simply written, who had been among the exiles. That's Rashi's view. Similarly, Jeremiah, who was given special dispensation and was not exiled with Zedekiah, left Eretz Yisrael for Babylon to join his exiled brethren, until God instructed him to return to Eretz Yisrael. Mordecai went into self-exile before the rest of his people to establish a holy atmosphere in Persia, so the Jews could survive the exile there. He followed the example of Jacob, who went down to Egypt before the enslavement of his children to sow the seeds of holiness, which sustained them in their exile.
Okay, so that's a kind of a pious approach to understanding what's happening. First of all, we should just recognize that the Rava's reading of the verse is absolutely the opposite of the plain meaning of the verse. The word hogla means was taken into exile.
Yeah.
So it's a passive, it's hofal. So it's a passive construct of the verb, which means that something was done to this person. Nevertheless, Rava says, no. He did it on purpose. He himself chose to go into exile. He didn't have to go into exile. He chose to go into exile. We should just, the background, of course, is that this is the preliminary exile that happened with the king Yehoiachin 11 years before the Babylonian exile of 586. He was exiled and then put into house arrest in Babylonia, but the Jewish community was still, it was in a certain elite that was taken away. And that's where we would understand that Mordechai was part of that elite, maybe, and goes with the royal entourage to be, the government in exile, so to speak, in Babylonia. But then you have Tzidkiyahu as the next king, and he's the one who was exiled in 586. He's the one who's in Israel. So Mordechai is in that pre-exile exile, the coming attractions exile. And here he's given credit for choosing to go into exile on his own. So whether you give it this idea that he's preparing the holiness or so on, or whether you take it more in terms of the kind of, even though it was said about Moses before, Avi, he's a leader. So, we have it, the captain goes down with the ship kind of idea. It's his responsibility to be there with his people. Israeli army policies, the high officers don't stay in the back. They actually lead the charge, right? They have to be actively involved in what their soldiers, what their underlings are being called to do. They have to show that they're doing it. So is Mordechai, was it really up to him could he choose not to have gone? Who knows? But that's part of what is imagined here, is that he's going through his own decision. Should I leave or not? And either way, you could argue for a decision. But the decision as understood here is that he sees the writing on the wall, to borrow another image from these stories. And he knows that this is going to be, it's going to be necessary for somebody to survive as a Jewish leader in the uprooted community when they finally get there. We have another example of somebody who makes a different decision, being condemned for that, according to the Midrash, in the story of Ruth, where the beginning of the book tells us about a noble family from the tribe of Judah who decide to leave Israel, leave Judea, when the going gets rough, and they go to Moab. And Avimelech is with his family, with his sons and his wife Naomi, and then the sons marry Moabite women, and so on. And the Midrash sees this as an act of abandonment. Avimelech was supposed to be a community leader, and he should have helped the community in the land of Israel struggle with their crisis. And instead, he ran away, and he just looked out for his own personal convenience. So the idea of what a leader needs to do is, of course, a very, very challenging issue. Moses himself Moses himself does the same thing. When God says to Moses, I'm going to wipe these people out. I'll start all afresh with you. Right? And Moses says, no way. It's either you accept this people of which I am a part, or else wipe me out, erase me from your book. Right? If you wanted me and it was your idea, God, you made me the leader of this people, then once I'm the leader of this people, that's it. I have to stay the leader of this people through their time of crisis. So this is the way that the Rava is imagining what's happening with Mordechai. Okay, so just as we've noted many, many times, the fun story of the Megillah ends up having a lot of dark context to it, a lot of stressful issues about Jewish survival, about Jewish safety, and so on. Okay.
The Megillah continues, and he, Mordecai, had raised Hadassah, who was Esther. The Gemara notes, the verse calls her Hadassah, and the verse calls her Esther, which was actually her name. It was taught in a Baraita. Rabbi Meir says her name was actually Esther. And why was she called Hadassah? After the designation of the righteous, who are called myrtles. And so it says, and he was standing among the myrtle bushes.
Okay, look at note 36.
Note 36 from Zechariah 1:8. The verses there describe Zechariah's vision, in which the divine presence was standing among Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Yet the verse states that the divine presence was standing among the myrtle bushes. We see then that righteous people are referred to as myrtles, since the fragrant myrtle gives off a pleasing aroma, and it refers us to Maharsha.
Right. So that's the image of God standing in support of the righteous people, the three righteous courtiers, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, from the book of Daniel also. So and then they're compared to myrtle bushes. So the myrtles, the hadassim, are fragrant, and just the way the acts and the lives of the righteous bring a good fragrance into the world. Of course, hadassim is myrtle branches that we use on Sukkot. We have the four species. So we have the etrog and the lulav, and then we have hadassim on one side and aravot on the other side. The willow branches are on the other side, and there's a standard midrashic understanding that this, these four species allude to the four different kinds of Jewish people that there are. So the hadassim are fragrant, and therefore they are the people that do such good things and are, very, very righteous people. So here we are as well, that in truth, her name was Esther, but she had a nickname Hadassah because she was such a sweetie pie. She was such a good person. She was always bringing, the aroma of goodness into her life, into the lives of everybody that she touched. So Hadassah was her nickname, according to this. We should understand, of course, that Hadassah is a Hebrew name. Esther is a Babylonian name. So the choice here of saying that her real name is Esther is to acknowledge that a lot of Jews have, names that are not necessarily Hebrew names. So this would be, again, a kind of a little tiny little fragment that is part of the picture of the Jewish people in Babylonia and trying to make a go of it there. And this child is named Esther, right? Just as if, today, without any, batting an eye, we would name, our kids Stacy. Oh, so not a Hebrew name. Okay. So, and then she has a Hebrew name, Hadassah. Okay, so that's the acknowledgement by Rabbi Meir. But we also have the opposite. The Braita. No, you're on mute.
I honestly don't do that deliberately, but evidently my elbow keeps hitting the thing. The Baraita also presents an opposite approach. Rabbi Yehuda says her name was actually Hadassah. And why was she called Esther in this verse? Because she used to conceal the facts about her origins by not revealing that she was Jewish. As it says, Esther told nothing of her people, etc.
Okay, so this is the like it says here, we take it as her. Of course, she had a Hebrew name originally. Her name was Hadassah, but Esther is the name that alludes to the hiddenness that she had to live. She had to live a hidden existence. So this is subsequently, when we tell the story afterwards, she wasn't called Esther when she was a little child. She was called Esther afterwards when we tell the story about this woman, Hadassah, who had to hide her identity when she won the beauty contest to be the next queen of Persia and everything that happened afterwards. We have another, so Esther is seen as a name that comes out of the Hebrew Seter. Seter means hiddenness, mystery. Yoshev b'Seter Elyon b'Tzel Shaddai Yitlonan. Right, this is whatever it is, Psalm 90, 91, something like that. We sit within the hiddenness and the shade of God who watches over us. So atas seterli, right? You are the hiding place for me. We say it also in Psalm 27 in a certain way. So, and also we have on the other side, Seter can be the hiding, God being protective and helping us avoid danger. But then it can also be very frightening, right? That's called Hester Panim, when God hides from us, not hiding with us, but hiding from us. So that's we're coming up to it in 2 weeks, the admonitions, right? When the Torah says, and if you don't follow God's ways, then watch it, God will hide God's face from you. And in the Megillah reading, God is never mentioned. So God's presence is hidden with regard to the text of the Megillah. Okay, the Braita.
The Braita presents yet another approach. Rabbi Nehemiah says her name was actually Hadassah. And why was she called Esther in this verse? Because the nations of the world used to call her Esther, naming her after the moon, as if to say she is as beautiful as the moon.
Okay, Istahar. So a Sahara is a name for the moon. Sahara, Istahar. She has become as radiant as moonbeams. So this is again a pun on the word Esther. It sounds like that. The regular understanding is that it comes from the name Astarte, and it's a Babylonian name. It's not a Jewish name at all. But here we have them playing with making it into a Jewish name. Same thing with Moses, right? We had that with Moses too. The word Moses is name Moses is an Egyptian name, but the Torah gives it a Hebrew root. Right? Ki min hamayim mishitihu. I pulled him out of the water. Right? So that's a questionable etymology, to put it mildly, but nevertheless the lesson that the Torah wants us to take from the story.
That issue of her being named after Astarte is I don't know, it's even more startling because Astarte wasn't just a Babylonian name. Astarte was a goddess. She was
Well,
worshipped. She was
yeah,
worshipped by the
yeah.
Babylonians.
All right. I mean, we have, I have in my family and friends that I know, Jews named Paul.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Why would it, committed Jews who named their kid Paul? You lose the association.
Yeah.
It becomes a normalized name, and once it becomes a normalized name, you don't have
You don't have the associations
of what that name actually came from.
Yeah. I never thought about that with regard to Paul. Yeah, that is rather deliciously ironic, I guess we could say.
Sure. Yeah. All right, moving right along.
Moving right along. The Baraita, surprise, surprise,
Maybe we will find out.
Editorial comment, presents yet another approach. Ben Azai says, Esther was neither tall nor short, but of average height, like a myrtle. Therefore, though her true name was Esther, she was called Hadassah. Again, I guess the link with.
So this is a little weird here. Hadassah, of course, means myrtle again, but Ben Azai says that she was, this way. So look at 39.
39. We find 1 Samuel 1:11 that Hannah prayed for a child who would be literally a male child, which the Gemara in Berachot 31b expounds to mean a child normal among men. One of the normal characteristics listed there in the Gemara is, quote, not too tall or too short, end quote. We see then that being of average height is a positive feature. Esther had that feature and was therefore called Hadassah.
All right, this is the three bears approach, right? Not too tall, not too short, just right. And therefore she was praised for being this kind of just right person. A little weird. Of course, now we're getting away from, we just did get away from it in the previous one. We've moved from spiritual characteristics or moral characteristics to physical characteristics.
Physical ones.
This becomes, of course, the whole way of judging women by how they look. So Ben Azai is saying, she was just right. She impressed people as being, the perfect mean, right? The golden mean, right? So that's his way of saying that her name is Hadassah. That's why he explained that she's Hadassah. Hadassah is like the perfect branch. It's not too long, it's not too short. The leaves are not too big, but they're very nice. So they're not overwhelming. With regard to Hannah's prayer, that I think, anecdotally, I think it's I could say that is a prayer that many parents have, right? You want your child to come out normal, right?
Normal.
How many people when the baby comes, they count the fingers?
Yeah, got all his fingers. I always ask that of
right.
my friends when they had
that's
children.
The whole thing, right? Well, you want the physical wholeness of the person to be not in any extraordinary eye-catching way. I just want a normal baby, right? So I mean, that's true in the context of when the child is born, but to say that later on when the person grows up, there was nothing remarkable about this person, isn't that great? I don't know.
In English, that doesn't sound right.
Right.
It doesn't sound good.
All right. Here we go.
Yeah,
and now as we're working our way down from gloriously radiant to, all right, just right. And now we have the next one.
Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says, though her true name was Esther, Esther was of greenish complexion, like a myrtle. However, she was endowed with a touch of grace by God, which made her appear beautiful to the nations and to Ahasuerus.
Okay, So this text is, it's a little bit noticeable, right? Esther Yarakroket. She was greenish. She looked a little green. Okay. And that's why she was called Myrtle. She was called, because she was noticeably green. So this is the opposite of Ben Azai, right? Ben Azai is, there was nothing noticeable about her. There was nothing uniquely eye-catching about her. She was average in every way. According to Rabbi Shua ben Korcha, not at all. She actually was noticeably different from other people. And here you have it kind of like basically just smoothed out. The Hebrew for the next part is interesting. The way the translation here is a touch of grace. Chut shel chesed, a thread of grace, right, was drawn upon her by God, right? So chut shel chesed mashuch aleha. So if we want to get a little bit more into what the statement is here, well, look at note 40.
Note 40 says, presumably this means that she had a sallow complexion. Hence, she was also called Hadassah. Right. This refers back to note 35.
So I don't know. Somebody should look up the word sallow.
I always thought sallow was yellow, but let me see. I've got a dictionary.
Right. Well, in Talmudic terms, green and yellow are pretty much the same.
Yeah, that makes
and medieval terms.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Green is of course, green is yellow and blue together, but green is considered in the family of yellow.
Yeah. All right, let me see what we get from an official dictionary or an official dictionary. Come on.
I have it.
Oh, good. Okay, you go.
Go ahead.
Sallow means unhealthy in appearance, often yellow in color, and is almost invariably used to describe someone's complexion.
Okay, so yellowish complexion, unhealthy. So that's what we need to actually go with this. What he's saying is she was not beautiful. We would if we wanted to be misogynistically Yiddishist, she could have been called even a miskite. She was ich. She was, and then Hadassah would actually be a cruel nickname, right? She would be called Myrtle, but a myrtle is green, and that's beautiful for a myrtle. Myrtle is a beautiful branch, a beautiful leaf, it smells great, but she is being called this nice name to highlight that she's a freak, that she doesn't look as healthy as she should, or as we would like. So here Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is actually pushing this idea of the Purim story in general, of things being turned upside down. Right? That, you know what, when we think about this heroine, we end up always talking fairy tales. Oh, she wins the beauty contest. She was the most beautiful woman in the world, and so on and so forth. And now what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says is, no. Actually, objectively speaking, and in fact, when people who didn't have any, role to play in the story, people would look at her and she would go, she doesn't look very good, right? And maybe the kids would even run after her and taunt her and call her Hadassah. And nevertheless, when it was important, some mysterious charm, some quality that was irresistible was about her and carried the day. And this, of course, we know also in history and in society, there are people that are not conventionally beautiful, and nevertheless, they have something fascinating about them that people are drawn to. And that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha could be saying. Geraldine.
It also says sallow is any of several low-growing or shrubby European willows especially Salix caprea, having large catkins that appear early in the spring and formerly used as a source of charcoal and tannin.
Look at that. So now there's more things to look up in the dictionary. Right? That's one of the great things about it. It just basically, once you start looking in the dictionary, you never can get out of the dictionary. I don't know what catkins are and all that stuff, but it's notable for us, right? That the plant analogy is not with myrtles, but with willows.
Oh, it says catkins are flowers which appear before the leaves.
Thank you. All right, good. So thank you very much. So but the willows, but then what she's being called, she's not called Arava, right? She's not called willow, she's called myrtle, right? Because the myrtle is, again, as I say, there's a euphemistic taunting quality to this idea of her being called this. And then nevertheless, she overcomes the superficial, literally, the skin level of things that people perceived, and there was something mysteriously attractive about her, despite the convention. Okay. No.
This is I don't know. It's doing something just to mess with me because I'm not touching it. However, the Megillah continues. Since she had neither father nor mother.
Okay, this is the continuation of the verse. We had the verse at 13a2. Mordechai raised Hadassah, and the continuation is since she had no father and mother.
Neither father nor mother.
Okay.
It is already clear from this verse that Esther was an orphan. Accordingly, the Gemara asks, then why is it necessary for the verse to continue and when her father and mother had died? Excuse me. The Gemara answers, Rav Acha said that the Megillah wishes to emphasize that Esther never had a father or a mother. For when Esther's mother conceived her, her father died. And when Esther's mother gave birth to her, Esther's mother died. Excuse me again.
So, okay, so now we get this, really, much more, dramatic, backstory of this heroine, that she comes from a time, from a background of adversity, no father, no mother. Okay. She never knew her father. She never knew her mother. They were all lost to her before she could be aware of them. She never had any parental love or support. And that, of course, increases all the more the importance of Mordechai's act of generosity, that he has taken her to take care of her. Okay.
The Megillah states, and when her father and mother had died, Mordechai took her as his daughter. A Tana taught in the name of Rabbi Meir, do not read as his daughter, but rather as his home, that is, his wife. For Mordechai, in fact, married Esther.
Okay, so now we're getting into some extra intriguing questions.
Indeed.
Right, so he wasn't just a nice guy who adopted her as his daughter to make sure that she was protected and raised properly, but he ended up marrying her. Okay, so there's no discussion here. What's the age difference? What's the propriety of it? But he's pushing this to say by Asher lekacha Mordechai lo levat. Bat means a daughter. He goes Asher lekacha lo Mordechai lo levayit, right? To be a wife, right? So he marries her. Okay, let's just can go into this, and then we'll have to figure out that, and it's going to come up a little bit later as well. How do we then work back and forth between Esther being Mordechai's wife and then what the other stuff that happens? Okay.
Gemara now proves that the word bat, daughter, can be explained as bait, home or wife. And similarly, it says, and the poor man had nothing except for one little ewe which he had bought. And he raised her, and she grew up together with him and with his children. She would eat from his bread, and she would drink from his cup, and she would lie in his bosom. And she was like a daughter to him.
Okay, so this is a verse or a description that comes from the prophet Nathan, who is speaking to King David. After King David has his affair with Bathsheba, and the prophet Nathan is now excoriating him, right, admonishing him that he did the wrong thing. And he says, imagine this person, right? Imagine one simple person who had nothing, right? They had nothing. They weren't rich. They weren't famous. They certainly weren't a king, right? And all they had was this one little lamb that they loved so much and they doted over. And he took care of it, and he would hug this little lamb, right? And then the continuation of the story is, and then this heartless, rich guy comes and takes the lamb away. And King David says, what an SOB, what a terrible thing. And then what does Nathan say? You are the man. You're the person who did that, right? You took away Uriah's wife. That was his love of his life. And you could have had anything, and you took away this one love that this person had. Okay, but anyway, the point is that at the end of this description, it says she would lie in his bosom and was like a daughter to him. The Gemara continues, it analyzes.
The Gemara analyzes this verse. Does it follow that because she would lie in his bosom, she was like a daughter to him? How does the ewes lying in his bosom make her similar to a daughter? We must say then that the verse does not mean like a daughter, but rather like a home, that is, a wife who lies in her husband's bosom. So too in our verse in the Megillah, the intent is that Mordecai took Esther as a home, that is, a wife.
Okay.
QED.
So the assumption that the intimacy between the woman and the man, the woman lying in the embrace of the man, has to be understood in the most intimate and sexualized way. It can't just be a man giving a hug to his daughter, right? This is a continuous state. She is always would be lying within the embrace and the bosom of the man. So this has to be something more than just, every once in a while having your daughter sit on your lap and giving her a hug. So that's the way the Gemara assumes it, and therefore the word bat is really bayit.
Right.
Okay, so now back to this now with regard to Mordechai. Mordechai is now described as having taken Esther as his wife. Anybody have any comments up to this point? Okay.
The Megillah continues. And the 7 maids, etc., that were fit to be provided for her from the house of the king.
Okay, look at 47 just to get the whole verse.
Note 47, Esther 2:9, the verse in its entirety reads, and the maiden pleased him, and she obtained his kindness, and he hurried her cosmetics and her appointed rations to give her, and the 7 maids that were fit to be provided for her from the house of the king, and he changed her and her maids to the best of the house of the women.
Okay. So this is, we've skipped into the second chapter. We've skipped the whole story about how Esther gets put into this position. And we're talking about the head of the harem who decides that he really likes this person, Esther. Going back to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, she has this charm. She has some ineffable quality about her that distinguishes her, picks her out from the crowd of all these other beautiful women that are competing And he likes her so much that he takes extra special care of her, right? And she's got 7 maidens that are with her as well. So now the Gemara, points out what's this all about.
The Gemara explains, Rava said, for Esther would count the days of the week through them to keep track of which day was the Sabbath. Her 7 maids worked in rotation, each one assigned a specific day of the week. Thus, when the Sabbath maid arrived, Esther knew it was the Sabbath.
Okay, so here we have a kind of a, they notice that it's 7 maidens. Could that be a coincidence? We don't think.
We don't think
We
so.
don't think so, right? So how did that 7 work? Let's look at
49.
49.
The commentators wonder why Esther had to resort to such an elaborate system in order to keep track of the Sabbath. Yarod Devash explains that Esther, mindful of the dictum that idleness leads to irrational, sinful behavior, according to Ketubot, sought to work all week, yet rest on the Sabbath without arousing suspicion that she was a Jewess. She accomplished this by assigning each maid a different day of the week. Those who ministered to her during the week did not see her rest on the Sabbath, and the Sabbath maid assumed that she was idle all week as well.
Okay, so this is one imagining. The Yarot Vash is Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz. And so his idea is that this is part of a two-pronged effort. On the one hand, she wants to keep Shabbos. On the other hand, she doesn't want anybody to know that she's keeping Shabbos because she still wants to keep secret that she's Jewish. So therefore, what she does is she has these different maidservants, and ne'er the twain shall meet, right? They don't. One doesn't know what the other one is doing. So therefore, they're not quite sure how she spends all the other days. Each one is isolated in their own day of responsibility, and they have no idea what else is going on the other days. So this was her way of then for making sure that nobody knew that Shabbos was her day of rest. The question, of course, is this beginning. Why did she need this? Why did she have to resort to such an elaborate system in order to keep the Shabbos? Right? Didn't she have her, Shomrei week calendar on her refrigerator? So, of course, the answer is no. She couldn't afford to do that, right? Couldn't she have a pocket calendar and just look at it, by herself? No, she couldn't do that either. So this is part of, again, retrojecting Jewish experience into Esther's story of people who had to hide their Jewishness and who wanted somehow or other to be able to keep Shabbos, and who had to keep track of Shabbos, even though all around them, everything was anti-Shabbos. Everything was against keeping track of Shabbos. When we have, terrible, heartbreaking situations all through Jewish history, both in terms of actually being in some kind of isolation, where how do you keep track of time? How do you actually keep track of the days of the week when you're thrown away from the world? And then the other side of it is what happens when you're thrown into a system that keeps track of time in a completely different way. So the conversos, how did they keep track of Shabbos, and how did they abide by Shabbos when it was not only not the right day to rest, but it was bad to rest on Shabbos, right? If you rested on Shabbos, you were going to be killed. You gave yourself away. So in all of these kinds of situations, there's a tremendous tension about how to figure this out. To editorialize a little bit, we live in a situation like this, even though it's not at all a situation of persecution and oppression and so on. But we are surrounded and we are immersed in a culture that keeps time in a different way. The Jewish calendar is absolutely irrelevant 99.9999% of the time to our lives and certainly to society's lives, unless somebody makes an effort, somebody brings up something, having school start on Rosh Hashanah. So we end up going, no, you can't do that. There are endless discussions again and again and again about all kinds of protest marches among leftists, especially, where on the one hand they want to be good allies, and on the other hand the protest marches are so many times held on Shabbos. And then there are all these discussions: is it the right thing to go and do it? Is it not the right thing to go and do it? Why don't they respect Jewish sensibilities? How many Jews care about Shabbos anyway who are part of that community that fights for all these rights? That's a sad story in and of itself. I mean, there are many Jews that fight for those rights, but then they don't care about Shabbos. There are many Jews that care about Shabbos. They don't care about fighting for those rights. So we get the Jews that do care about these things and do care about Shabbos are squeezed in the middle. So this is an issue, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle for all of us to keep track of time. One of the other commentaries says that this was actually not simply or only the kind of effort that this Yarot Dvash explanation is, but it was also a way of celebrating Shabbat by saying every day, you are my maidservant number one of the week. By saying it in Hebrew, the word is Shabbat. You are my maidservant number two of the week, right? Of Shabbat. And then finally, you are my Shabbat maid, is a way of honoring Shabbat. This is what we do every day when we say, Hayom Yom Rishon B'Shabbat. This is the first day of the week, the first day toward Shabbat, and this is the Psalm of the day. That's how we introduce the Psalm of the day. So this is the Ben Yehoyada, and Benayahu, that's the same author, who says this is a fulfillment of the 10 Commandment mitzvah, the commandment Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, always take cognizance, always give remembrance to the day of Shabbat. So what she did was that she simply applied her consciousness of Shabbat, not that she needed them in order to remind her of Shabbat, but the other way. Because she always was thinking about Shabbat, she took other things in her life and she labeled them in such a way as to be celebrating Shabbat. So this was her fulfillment of honoring Shabbat during the week, not simply on Shabbat, but the whole week leads to Shabbat. So that's the kind of homiletic explanation that's also given here. The idea, of course, of the hiding and the subterfuge is much more, I think, true to the essence of this story and to the essence of the concerns that the rabbis are bringing to this story. I'll tell one more story. I was walking to shul once back in the old days when we used to try to have a mincha ma'ariv every once in a while on Shabbos. And I was walking to the shul, and a young person was walking with a group of friends right in front of the shul as I was walking to the shul and turning to go into the building. And I said to this young person, "Good Shabbos." They were going off on their own. And I hear that person say to their friends, "Wow, I didn't even realize that today was Shabbat." It wasn't on their radar screen. It just wasn't part of the way that they mark time. Okay.
The Gemara explains. Rava said, "For Esther would count the days of the week through them, to keep track of which day was the Sabbath. Her 7 maids worked in rotation, each one assigned a specific day of the week. Thus, when the Sabbath maid arrived, Esther knew it was the Sabbath.
Okay, now we continue.
The verse continues, and he changed her and her maids, etc. The verse implies, excuse me, that Haggai, the custodian of the maidens, did something special for Esther and her maids that he did not do for the other maidens. There is a dispute as to what this special favor was.
Right. So the word vayishaneha, it could mean that he took care of her again and again and again, was always constantly attentive to her. But here they're reading the word vayishaneha as from the word shinui, lishanot, to change something. He did something different for her than he did for everybody else. He treated her a little differently. So what is this difference that he did?
Rav said that he fed her Jewish, that is, kosher food. And Shmuel says that he fed her fatty hog bacon. Rabbi Yochanan says he fed her seeds. And similarly, it says regarding, excuse me, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Isaiah.
We had them just a little while ago.
So the steward took away their food and gave them seeds.
Okay, just look at 54 for a second.
Note 54, that's Daniel 1:6. These 4 Jewish lads were being groomed to serve in King Nebuchadnezzar's palace. The king entrusted them to a steward who was to provide them with food from the royal kitchens. However, they refused the non-kosher food and asked instead to be provided with nothing more than seeds. Nevertheless, they remained healthier than the other lads who partook of the royal food.
Okay, so the issue, of course, as we see, is what is Esther, who's hiding her identity, what's she going to do when it comes to eating? What does she eat? So Rav said he takes good care of her and he only gives her kosher food. Okay, but that brings up a question, right? How does he know to give her kosher food? I thought she's hiding her identity. So the certain consideration that he's giving her shouldn't ever come up. So look at 50.
50. At this point in the Megillah, Esther had still been hiding the fact that she was Jewish. If so, how can Rav say that Haggai gave her kosher food to eat as a special favor? This would imply that she had asked for it and he would know she was Jewish. Ben Yehoyada answers, everyone knew that Esther grew up in Mordecai's house. However, they had assumed that he found her somewhere and adopted her, so they still did not know what nation she was from. Esther told them that she wanted kosher food because she was accustomed to it, and changing her diet might affect her beauty. Alternatively, since it was known that kosher food is healthier than non-kosher food, Esther could have requested for kosher food for health reasons.
Of course, which is why there's such a multi-billion-dollar kosher food industry.
Yeah.
It's not because of the handful of Jews that keep kosher. It's because people are convinced that kosher is better.
Better.
So the two explanations here are, there's no giveaway necessarily that she's Jewish. One could simply be, look, I was raised in a Jewish family. So, I was always exposed to this kind of food. Right now, it's a tense situation. I have to get ready for the contest. So just give me what I'm used to. So it happened to be kosher food. Of course, and that's why the Hebrew is very specific, right? Omar Rav she'echila ma'achal Yehudi, right? It doesn't say kosher. It doesn't say ma'achal kasher. It says Jewish food, right? Jewish style. That's Mordecai. Mordecai Yehudi. Mordecai is Jewish. So okay, I'll give you the Jewishy food, right? So that's the suggestion here. Okay, but Shmuel says, of course, he doesn't know that she's Jewish. So what is he doing? He thinks he's being very nice. So he's giving her like the real best pieces of bacon and, lardy, greasy, yummy, good stuff. And he's being nice to her from his perspective, right? There's a story back when Yonah and his friends graduated high school. So then a bunch of them took gap years, right? They took a year off before they went to college. And a friend of Yonah's went to, I think it was Argentina. He went to a restaurant, and he was traveling around, he was sort of doing all kinds of things that young people can get away with. And he comes into a restaurant and he sits down, and he clearly hasn't eaten a decent meal in a while. And the waiter comes over and he orders something, and he says, but please don't put any meat. Argentina is a big meat country. Everything has meat in it. And he was trying to eat vegetarian. He was trying to not eat treif. So he says, give me this dish, but please just don't give me any meat. So the waiter goes back and then comes back with this heaping plate of food, and it's got all this stuff in it. And the guy starts eating it, and he sees he's eating meat. And he says to the waiter, he says, I asked, is this meat? He goes, yeah. He says, I asked that you not put them. He says, are you kidding, young man? You look like you haven't eaten a decent meal in months. How could I not give you the meat? So he said, of course I'm going to give you some meat. He was being an extra nice guy to the guy.
Yeah.
So there you are. So that's what Haggai was doing for Esther. He wanted to make sure that she was treated well, and she was going to be healthy and had enough calories and all that kind of stuff. So now the question, of course, is, what does she do with the bacon that's on the plate? So let's look at 51.
51 says, this was considered a delicacy, according to Chulin 17a.
And
Rashi,
still to this very day.
Rashi explains that Esther ate the pork, but was not punished since she was forced to eat it. However, Tosafot maintained that Esther definitely did not partake of the pork. And then there's a variety of
okay, forget that. Yeah.
According to Aruch, the correct reading of the Gemara should be the tops or heads of lettuce.
Not pork at all. It's not chaziri, right? But it's chizri.
Hizri.
Right? Like chazeret. So like on Pesach.
Okay.
So it's a vegetable. No, God forbid. So this is, of course, the commentators struggling with what the Gemara leaves us. The Gemara puts the plate down, the plate of bacon down, but then what do we do with it? Do we imagine that she actually ate it or not? So Rashi, or let's go backwards. Tosfot cannot imagine that she ate it. Tosfot cannot allow themselves to think that she would have done such a terrible thing. So, maybe she had some dogs under the table. Maybe she was very nice to her maidservants and they ate very well. But she gets away with not eating the food. Rashi says point blank, says she ate it and she was not guilty of a sin to be punished for this because of onus, because of force. She's being forced to eat it. She had no choice. Okay? So this, of course, again, is reflective of bigger stories and bigger discussions that people have had, that Jews have had over the centuries about different kinds of situations. When do you have choice? When do you have a choice and when don't you have a choice? What's at stake, to use a pun here, right? Stake, get it? So What exactly is a person's calculation here? Does Esther at this point understand what she is being put up to do? Right? At this part, in this early stage of the story, there is no Haman, right? There is no threat to the Jewish people that's explicitly created by Haman. It's all background stuff. It's all very subtle, right? This is stuff that's being teased out again and again and again in the Talmudic expansion of the story. How much, why, I mean, again, why does Mordechai put her up to this? Even worse, if she's married to him, right? What is this choice that she's being forced to make, to go into, just lie low, go, the opposite, hide your daughter, hide your wife from the people that are looking around for beautiful contestants for the king. So what exactly is the impetus? What's compelling Mordechai and then Esther, who agrees to go along with it, to actually try to engage in this contest and win? Wouldn't it be better to lose? Even if you have to be in the contest, make sure that you lose. But they want to win. So underneath all of this is the understanding that something big is really at risk here, and that Esther, I mean, this is a real, thriller, spy novel kind of thing. She is, a secret agent. She's, she has a role to play here that is absolutely, contingent on secrecy. The Esther part, the hidden part, has to be maintained, and it's for the sake of something very, very, very important, the nation, right? So this is going to be the question, spoiler alert, this is going to be the question not only about what she eats, but how does she sleep with this guy? How does she end up actually, being married to Achashverosh? So this is back and forth. Even if she somehow engages in this subterfuge, does she have to mitigate it? Does she have to do everything she can to minimize the kinds of violations that are involved? Do you say, no, once she's in it, you can't play games anymore? You have to act as normal as possible to make sure that people are convinced that you are who you're supposed to be. And eating that food, means, in the end, are you going to succeed in your mission or not? So very tough stuff. Okay, we're going to stop here. We'll continue, God willing, next week. And as I say, given how fast we're going here, we will need to get to page 14 next, and that could be soon. So please, each person, and if you talk to anybody else who wasn't on specifically today, who you know about, because I don't want to have to start, I'm being lazy. I don't want to have to start figuring out who should get it and who shouldn't get it, and then I'll forget somebody. So please take this upon yourselves. Send me a note, and then I can easily send you the pages. Okay, the next pages will be 14 and 15. All right, Sei gesund, everybody.
Sei gesund, everybody. Stay safe.